Hello, my name is Alicia, and I'm going to be talking about Reflection Assignment 6, which is discussing knowledge. There were 3 videos to watch. The first video talking about the visual history of human knowledge, and there's a lot of mentioning of a shift that's taking place. What was once the way of order and how we viewed things as humans is transforming. And we now utilize not only the tree branches of order, we use networking. Coming from Aristotle's ideology from the ontology of a top-down structure, you're basically thinking the top is the priority, the bottom is not the priority, but is still involved. Like a pyramid. You think of this in the natural ranking order. And the example that the speaker, spoke with was the top would be God. In what religions utilize this. And then the bottom would be like the smallest pieces of life. Lots of visual tools. You can think of this like a family tree. That the tree is what was used in order to make things connect and make things flow from one place to another place. He mentioned that this tree called the Porphyrian tree, the oldest tree of knowledge, is what was the way of, again, ordering, but is now evolving. And there's not only been a shift in our knowledge of things, but we're shifting to networking. And we've also shifted in our social ties. We as humans, continue learning more about how we live, how we maneuver. Come to find that we don't see the world as just one priority, one centralized figure, and then the rest is dispersed. Our brains don't work that way. Our brains work more like a network, where there is no central figure. Decentralized is what he said in the video. And with that being the case, you see a lot of different wirings, no longer branches, but just ideas from one place to another place without real linear function. It's not just straight. It's quite the opposite. And this is kind of like spreading activation in the sense of everything being really connected in our brains and in life generally outside of our brains. One thing can connect to another thing. And if we're speaking mainly on the brain, you have one node that activates and then lets all the other nodes in proximity know that, well, something is happening. And then they start activating, which then leads to more activation. And it's all connecting to one another. And there's really no way to truly explain how vast our brain is, and so many associations can be made from the smallest little details. And so, network does explain it in a better way than, let's say, a tree would. Granted, I would say that a tree is still good. Trees have roots which can stretch and can be connected, in earth to different nature products like, other plants, the soil, which is not a living thing per se, but like it's still a part of earth and allows for the flows of the roots and other, species living underground to be connected to the tree. So if you think of it that way, trees can be sort of like a way to expand your connectivity, but most visual presentations of tree of knowledge use the leaves, which I don't feel like maybe can replicate a network or be as good of a presentation as a network. And a change of language was also mentioned, and it was, instead of using the tree of life, use the web of life, because our brain is like a web of thoughts and, stimuli being connected, and different activations taking place, and sparks and wires and lots of different routes that your nodes and activation can take place in, pretty much. The movement that was proposed is called networkism. It's kind of interesting and is said to be really useful for problem solving. And there are so many problems in the world that, of course, needing this type of useful tool in a way that allows for other parts to be utilized is the best way to combat confusion, misunderstanding, and inspire collaboration. And networking, I always kind of think technologically when I hear the word network, because on a network you are on the internet and you've got different people who you can collaborate with, teamwork, and work together to find a solution and continue moving up and, leaning on one another. So, networking can, not only be pertaining to the brain, but is pertaining to life and its vastness. And there were a lot of art pieces and other visuals that were off of the screen, off of the paper, and were 3D, where you could be in it and live and see with real time and eyes that everything is connected through a web of wires for life. Our second video also speaks a little bit on spreading activation, and it was talking about how a false memory can be had a brain fart, but how something that was not really said can be conjured if you can convince somebody enough. And through this video, there was an audience and 3 performers, which kind of, if you set the scene, it was medieval dressed artists who were trying to do this experiment where the audience members had to pay attention to what was said, and at the end they would be tested over what was said, and the audience members were listening really intently, and the performers were saying a bunch of fruit names like strawberry, banana, orange, apple, so on and so forth. And towards the end, the performer would ask the audience if they heard this word or this word, and the fruits that they used were strawberry, I think. No, it was not strawberry, it was banana, it was orange, it was apple, and it was fruit. And the word that wasn't said in the performance was fruit, but because so many fruits were named and said, there was a connection to the word fruit, which made people think that fruit was said, but it wasn't said. There was an indirect activation, and there was a strong association because of all the fruits that people were really convinced, really were I'm so certain that I heard the word fruit in this performance, but it was never said. The word fruit sounded really familiar, and there was a false memory attached. And that is really you can attach this to different things. And I was going to say that it was scary because if you're going through like a witness interview and a lot of things are being placed in your mind throughout the interview, you can maybe think of how something was really similar to something that didn't happen, and then think, okay, well, this situation that didn't occurred because that's what I'm familiar with. But because it didn't happen, perhaps other people could be accused of something if it matches descriptions. So, situations of false memories can really impact people's lives, and that's why I'm thinking it's so scary. This really does go to show that like the flexibility of the brain, is a showcase of how it's never like straightforward. There can always be a change, and the brain, there's a word, elastic. You can always really maneuver the brain to be open to ideas. And although some people perhaps try not to change their views and their beliefs, it's also a healthy thing to make sure that your brain is able to move and grow and not stay constant. And because if it's not growing, it's dying. So to think more into this, the brain is nonstop, always working, which is great. And you can think of something just from an association that you might personally have, and everybody has different associations because everybody is unique. And I guess it would come in real good handy if you're in a trivia match and you are trying to think of whatever the answer to said question is, and you can figure out what things are related to get to the answer. And I guess if you pay more attention to something, it can also help with making that connection more firm and strong and not so weak. But it might also prove to work against you, just how what the video was talking about, such a strong connection to something can make you think something was said but nothing was really said. The spreading activation that was mentioned, associations, one thought leading to another thought, and next thing you know, activating other thoughts. It's really simple, and the brain is really cool about that. So that was video 2. The third and final video is discussing indigenous science or indigenous knowledge being recognized as a science. And from my understanding, I never really considered how indigenous knowledge could really impact our world as indigenous people that have lived and have understood what it takes to survive from generation to generation. There is so much they know about the world that newer civilizations are not so keen to. And the speaker, Albert Wiggin, spoke on how Western science considers indigenous knowledge as traditional ecological knowledge, but it's also kind of a science. And his argument was for Western society to see indigenous society as a teammate, a partner in trying to make the world a safer, longer lasting environment for humans. And in my take, I kind of got the perspective that Western society doesn't really take indigenous society very seriously, hence why they call it traditional ecological knowledge and not indigenous science. Science is the working of observing something, experimenting, and then analysis, but just as the Western culture does, the indigenous culture does as well. So it should be seen as a science. a word that was said was how separatism, distinguishing the two, make it to where Western science doesn't really take indigenous science seriously. And, whether that be because indigenous science takes traditional ideas and, what is not so modern of a take on, survival is just different from Western society or whatever else could be the reason. Indigenous societies and their sciences are, very impactful, and they've survived so long using their ideologies. Not to mention the fact that we were once indigenous people ourselves, like around 3,000 years ago. So it's not like we don't understand what being indigenous as a people feels like. Maybe not our current generation, because we've, just been here our whole lives, but, the United States was not always the United States. And that's something that we can relate to with the indigenous people, if we gave them a chance. Also known as finding a common ground. And the main reason is because we've got a really big problem on our hands with our world, which is climate change. And the Western societies and the sciences are just not familiar with climate change. And, we're going through a whole lot of global warming, and it's not going to stop, but we're not really changing our ways. There is a little bit of work to, being seen and being done to help with this problem, but we are not reaching, we as in Western society, we are not really reaching towards the people who have the knowledge to overcome this, to live, to withstand the change. And I, think that this may come from having a superiority complex. Why speak to the little person who, hasn't developed and evolved like the Western society has? It's giving very Western and entitled. Personal biases coming out. Ignore. It just makes the most sense to collaborate, to work together, and come up with a solution that can save our planet from heating up to a boil. And like I was mentioning earlier about maybe Americans having that slight superiority complex, well, Western society could be experiencing the judgment of resemblance, which, if I can understand this correctly, given the belief of something that you truly hold close to your heart, that you're most familiar with, can really be of influence to your judgments on people, on objects. We may see ourselves as the prototype, the original design, and we may not be so keen to explore other ways, other perspectives, other people living on the same planet. But they're still human beings, despite not maybe responding to the same ideologies that we do. We can relate on one thing, and that is being a human being. We pull things from our storage unit, the long-term memory, and through having all this knowledge, we make decisions. We cloud our thoughts with what we always know. And it can be hard to expand from what we always know, to reach forward and try something new that could work, that could be the solution to this problem that's not going to stop. And we can't keep doing the same things over and over again, hoping to find a change, because that's delusional. And so with all of this, I encourage for thought and for openness to be explored, so that we can grow within ourselves and grow as a nation, and allow for other ideas and thoughts from people that we're not so familiar with, but who exist on this same planet, to allow for knowledge to be shared and for change to be made. And I feel that because we collaborate on other things, rules and regulations across different world countries, this is something that we should take seriously and make sure to keep attention on, because if not, we'll be no longer living on this planet. This planet will be uninhabitable. And then this goes all the way back to our first video: networking, collaboration. It's important to reach for other perspectives and to listen and understand what others have done in order for themselves to survive, and then see if it works for us, working together. And I feel like we could all, humans, we all could benefit from expanding outside of our own ideals and working to shift in what we were always so comfortable with, and learn to accept that not everything can be in our control, but on the other hand, we can still keep working together to find more solutions. I think that's the whole point of this entire assignment. Social networks and building with systems of knowledge. We are all super capable of living and growing and finding new ideas. We could always work more on doing that stuff together. That's what I've gathered, and that's how I can apply it to living amongst other human beings on this earth. So that's all. Thank you.